Well, welcome to the next edition of Homegrown. My name is Harry from WEHM Radio out here on the east end of Long Island, and it's a pleasure to be a part of a kind of a special edition of Homegrown, the Hamptons Jazz Fest edition with Charles Owens. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. How's it going?
This is cool. You're doing a gig tonight in Sag Harbor, and a chance to get you and some of your musicians friends in the studio here.
Yeah.
Introduce me to these guys too, because
Yeah, we have on the bass, the upright bass, we have Mr. Chris Monson, and on the drums we have Mr. Jonathan Barber. We're very excited and lucky to have them both. They're incredible musicians.
I can't wait to chat with them in a little bit. But I want to kind of, I guess, start with Charles and kind of go over how we got here, so to speak, of how
sure.
we're sitting here in LTV Studios for Homegrown. When did you first off? We were talking about the instrument. We'll get into that. When did you first pick up a saxophone?
I was 8 years old. I'm 50 now. And I went to an assembly in a cafeteria in my elementary school, and they had all the instruments lined up on a table, all the brass instruments and string instruments, and it was basically the orchestra teacher and the band teacher were there to demonstrate them all, and the band teacher could play all of them, and I was really fascinated by all of them. But when he picked up the tenor saxophone, I saw this curve on his neck, and I was just like really intrigued by it. And so really, I think the reason why I picked it is because I just wanted to see it up close. I wanted to get it home and just study like all the stuff that was on it, because it just seemed so complex and fascinating. And I still just sit and look at it now, this many years later. And so that's when I started. But I was a piano player before that. I had been playing music since I was a little baby.
Well, I was curious. Was your family? Did they play instruments as well, or?
My dad played trumpet in high school, and I think more than musicians, my family was really into listening to music all the time. And so I had two sisters, and they were into really different types of stuff. Like one sister was into David Bowie, and the other sister was into like classic rock. My dad was into the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and then also he loved opera and he loved Prince. So there was like a huge amount of listening going on all the time. So I just kind of joined the fray. And then just took it further.
What did you listen to as far as what kind of inspired you? Because obviously you picked it up at a young age. Were you listening to jazz records back then, or was it kind of?
Actually, no, I didn't get into jazz until I was 15, 16. The thing that I was mostly into was obviously listening to the radio and listening to rock and roll and pop music like everybody else. But I was really into Mozart and Beethoven and Bach, like since I was 9 years old. I remember distinctly sitting in my living room listening to Missa Solemnis, which is a great Beethoven mass with a full orchestra and a double choir, and just sitting there by myself and just crying like 9 years old at the beauty of the music. So I caught the bug really early, and the thing that made me decide to become a professional musician that I wanted to do forever was the movie Amadeus.
All right.
Yeah.
Were you writing, were you composing at such a young age too?
Yes, I was. Yeah, I was composing at a really young age, just simple little things, but I was really fascinated with writing, and I was really fascinated with improvisation. I would sit at the piano before I knew anything about music and just play chords and see how it sounded. I was hooked really from an early age on music.
Very impressive. And now, of course, where did you grow up?
I grew up in the D.C. area. I was a Beltway kid, as they say, Northern Virginia, Alexandria, right off the Potomac, right off the Beltway, 495.
And you knew right away that you wanted to kind of just keep playing, and then in your teen years, were you in bands? Were you kind of?
I was in school bands at LI, and I played keyboards in a couple of rock bands in town, and then I started getting really serious. I went to 1 year of normal high school, and then I got auditioned and got accepted to Duke Ellington School for the Arts in D.C. Studied with David Yarborough, and there I met Stanley Turrentine and Wynton Marsalis, and I started getting exposed to like world-class people. And then I also graduated from an arts high school in Miami, Florida, called New World School of the Arts. And there's some great people that have come from that school since then. Marcus and E.J. Strickland, those guys went to the same school and had the same teachers that I did. And it was just an incredible campus in downtown Miami.
We want to get into the new school and all of that in the city when you first came in the early 90s. But why don't we do a song to get going here?
Great.
Charles Owens here on Homegrown
Great.
on LTV. This is great.
Yeah. You got this? One.
Very nice. Charles Owens Trio here in the studios of LTV for Homegrown. We're chatting, sounding good. They have a gig tonight in Sag Harbor for Hampton's Jazz Fest. And thanks for spending some time with us this afternoon.
Man, it's our pleasure.
We were talking about you as a 9-year-old in your room listening to Mozart, composing music.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine your parents were not worried about you, but you were different. When did you first find that set of friends and musicians to really you were like, wow, it's nice to find others like me?
Oh, well, when I was 10, 11, 12, I had neighborhood kids who were not really serious, but we had a great amount of fun and we were really silly with music. We didn't take music really so seriously. We used it as entertainment and just wrote really funny, stupid songs and recorded them. We had little cassette recorders and we'd record them and just laugh and think it was the best thing ever. But when I got into arts magnet high schools, I really met some people, especially in Miami, that were really serious about swinging Black American music and really understanding the harmonic and intellectual properties of it, and not just that, but the actual culture and the history and the relevance of it in that context. And then I met a couple of really great piano players who taught me a lot about voice leading. And so the arts magnet high schools were like a real intense environment for anyone that was there. There's no extracurricular activities, no football teams, no cheerleaders. You have 5 hours of academics in the morning and then 5 hours of music in the afternoon. So it would be 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day. And, that's what we did. And then afterwards, then it was time for me to practice saxophone.
Well, I was going to say, when did you first realize that you were comfortable kind of with This has to take hours of practice.
It certainly does.
And at what age did you like, all right, I can do this? You've had the confidence you felt you could do this for a living?
I don't know if I still have it yet. No, I think the first time I ever took a real solo, like a good improvised solo, and what I define as a good improvised solo is that I kept the form, I didn't play too many wrong notes, and I interacted with the band. I think I was 15, 16, and it wasn't great. Let me just, but
if there's tape
had those
there,
elements.
yes.
It had those elements where I kept the form, played the changes, and interacted with the band, and then ended the solo at the right place too. And I remember that day very clearly. It was at New World School of the Arts, and I, had that moment of literally feeling like I was walking on air, like a foot off the ground, because I was just so elated that I was able to do something like that. I mean, it just takes, like you said, it takes so much practice and thought and energy and relaxation at the same time. I mean, I could go on about what it takes, But that was the first time. And then when I got accepted to the new school in '92, I had some auditions that went really well. I remember we had, they gave us something to sight read, which is this tune called The Eternal Triangle by Dizzy Gillespie, and it's extremely difficult. It's like I couldn't have sight read that tune, but I knew it already. And so I was like, yeah, I'm going to sight read this tune. I just played it perfectly. And then everyone was like, whoa, that guy can really read. And I couldn't. But, when I got to the new school, and there was people there that were really ready to play. And so not only at the school, but it was New York City in the East Village, and so.
Was that a goal for you to kind of get to New York and to be around?
Well, I applied to a few different schools and got accepted to Berkeley and to North Texas State and to Manhattan School of Music and to the new school. And the reason why I chose the new school was one reason. It was Reggie Workman. I was extremely into Coltrane since I basically found out about him when I was 13 and 14. And by the time I was going to college, I had read at least 4 books on him. And one of the books I read twice because I was just, obsessed with it. And so Reggie Workman went on tour with a quintet tour with McCoy Tyner, Elvin Jones, and Eric Dolphy, and John Coltrane. And so I knew that the new school had a great reputation, and I knew Brad Meldau was there, and I knew Larry Goldings was there, and Pete Bernstein. Those were the guys in the senior class when I got there, and Spike too, Spike Wilner. So I knew that the new school was going to be a good choice. But the thing that made me decide was to be with Reggie Workman. And when I got there, he and I became really good friends, really close. I would go out to his house in New Jersey and help him with yard work because he had a bad back at the time. And then we'd sit and talk about, and he'd tell me stories. And I remember thinking, this is it. This is why I'm here. I can hear actual stories from the great Reggie Workman. And as a matter of fact, he took me to North Carolina, Hamlet, North Carolina, the birthplace of John Coltrane. And we played together for the unveiling of the plaque there. And we went to his childhood home, and it was an extremely emotional time for Reggie. And it was also just a special time for me to see this man, one of my idols in a vulnerable spot.
When did you get to New York? Early '90s, I think.
'92. Yeah, I graduated in '92 and went right to New York.
What was the jazz club scene like back then?
Well, one of my first gigs, which was crazy that I got this gig, was leading the Sunday jam session at the Village Gate. When the Village Gate, of course, every great master of jazz played there. There's a famous poster that I had a picture of for a long time where it was like, tonight, Horace Silver, John Coltrane, and Thelonious Monk, in one night. And it was like, oh man. No, yeah, and then I get to play there every Sunday, and that's where I met everyone, all the great people that I know now, the guys that have been there.
Is that intimidating at first? It has to be a little bit. I mean,
yes.
You hear these names and you hear the music, and in a way you're learning from them over the years, and when you get there, what is that like to?
It was less intimidating than it is exhilarating.
Yeah.
I never had a problem with self-confidence as long as I had a saxophone in my hand.
That's interesting. Yeah, that makes sense.
It's just some people, my students, I have to work on. My students have different abilities, and a lot of them aren't confident. And for me, I was just overly confident. It's like, sure, I'll take a solo. I don't know this tune or what I'm doing, but I'm going to play fast and loud.
I got it. Yeah.
And so my confidence got me through a lot. So that confidence led me and stuck with me in college. And so it was less intimidating than it was exhilarating. Like I'm finally
Yeah.
doing it. You know.
That's great. I'm curious because you mentioned you do teach,
do,
even
yeah.
to this day.
Mhm.
What do you do? How do you give an artist or a musician playing confidence? What's like that? What's kind of the step? I'm curious. In a nutshell, I don't want to get too deep into
Oh,
it,
sure.
but I'm curious when you see someone that's so talented, how do you build that confidence?
Well, I teach, the main thing is to teach them to physically get out of their own way.
Yeah.
In other words, approach the saxophone in a way that they're going to give it the right amount of air and relax their body. There's a lot of body mechanic work that I do with saxophone players as far as producing the right amount of air and opening the throat, and breathing from the belly, relaxing the shoulders, focusing energy on basically just a rectangle that starts from under your under your nose to under your belly button. Everything else needs to be relaxed. I give them visualizations. Once they have that, once you can actually give the saxophone the right amount of air, you can really get out of your own way and relax and be more confident.
Now that makes total sense because there's so much going on, but you need the right amount of everything
So much going on.
to
Yeah.
play. So you were in New York in the early '90s, and you're doing these different gigs. Tell me about Smalls Jazz Club. I've heard about this where it was kind of a thing where people would play till 7 in the morning.
It's
And
true.
what was that like to be involved in? Because it's very pure in a way.
It was,
You don't hear that's so different from.
Yeah, it's very different from the transactional places we have now, which is fine.
Which is
being
great.
transactional, that's fine. We need the money to stay open, right? But Smalls was started by an amazing person who I just saw last night after a while. His name's Mitch Borden, and he came to town and he wanted to start a club, but also a community of people, and it's exactly what he did. He tried to get a liquor license early on and failed, and so what it ended up being was that you would bring your own booze. And what that allowed is for no last call. And so we would have jam sessions till 6 or 7 in the morning. And I was there when it opened. I was there the first night it opened. It was Omer Avital, Brad Meldau, and Joe Farnsworth. And then the next night was the same group plus Peter Bernstein. And those guys were all the leaders of my scene, the guys who we considered, our representative of the best of our scene. And I still consider them that, And so I immediately got a gig there through the new school running the jam session there. Since I guess that was my thing, was running the jam sessions. I don't know how I did it, but and eventually, Mitch and I became really close friends, and I did live at Smalls Jazz Club
Wow.
for a minute, for about 7 months. Back in my 20s, I was just sort of roughing it in New York.
It has to be you're not making that much money from you're trying to figure out a way to do it.
Yeah.
And it's great that you can rely on the community.
Yeah, I mean, and the community really was Mitch. He was the one who gave me the job working the door, gave me the gigs. He got me my first record deal with Impulse Records, which was Coltrane's label. When I had no place to stay, he would let me stay in his one-bedroom apartment with his family, and then ultimately at the club for 7 months. And it was an incredible 7 months in that I had no responsibilities other than to play saxophone and listen to the gigs and work the door. And that's it. I had no bills, or home, or family, or anything, and my growth as a musician and a saxophone player just skyrocketed during that time. And it was a really special place. $10 to get in, and you could stay all night. And there was nothing to buy.
Yeah.
Except the cover charge. You bring it, like I said, bring your own everything, and everyone brought everything, and it was an incredible time for me. And I still have the first piano that was in Smalls. Mitch gave it to me. It's at my house. Big Yamaha.
What's so different than today, where everything, like you mentioned, is transactional and different. It's a business. And
Yeah.
when did it become? When did you kind of realize, okay, I want to? It doesn't sound like there was ever a backup plan. It was always, this is who I am and what I'm going to do.
Yeah. I had a really, really rough childhood. I was physically and mentally abused by my father. I was kicked out of my house when I was 15 years old. And so I had been on my own since I was 15.
Okay, wow.
I finished high school living in different people's houses and living in different apartments. And so, when I got to New York as a 20-year-old, I was extremely idealist. I survived through a lot of terrible things. And so I was like, I'm going to play this music and that's it. I don't care what it takes. There's no backup plan. I didn't want a backup plan. I didn't want to hear about it. I wanted to just play this music and that's it. I wanted to be a hardcore musician. And I was. And to the point of being homeless if I needed to do it. I didn't want to play wedding gigs or corporate gigs. I didn't want to be in a rock band. I wanted to play swinging black music.
You mentioned that you got your first record deal in the middle of the 90s
Mm-hmm.
or early portion. What was that like to put that together? And as far as musicians, was it tough? Who'd you, because putting together that group, it's got
Well,
to be a little bit of obviously
yeah.
pressure, but you have a lot of people you work with.
Well, the first thing you do to put the group together is you have a regular gig. And so steady employment is attractive to
Yeah.
anyone. And so my first band was Jason Linder on piano, Omer Avital on bass, and Daniel Friedman on drums. And we played the jam session. We played the 2 a.m. gig every Friday night at Smalls for 8 years. And we cultivated our sound that way. And, the New York Times was always coming down to Smalls doing reviews of the different groups that we were in. Omer Avital had a sextet that was me and Mark Turner, Joel Fromm, Myron Walden, and Ollie Jackson. And so we got written up in New York Times a lot. And then after we got, a bunch of write-ups and sort of started garnering some attention, Impulse Records came down and they actually wanted to do a compilation record, which was called Jazz Underground Live at Smalls. And we did it. And so they brought an incredible, rig down there, a road recording rig, and we recorded a compilation. So it was 2 tunes from my quartet, 2 songs from Omer Avital's sextet, which I was in, 2 songs from Jason Linder Big Band, which I was also in, and then a few other songs from a few other bands that were down there. And it was our big break, basically. And Omer got signed to Impulse to do a full album. Jason got signed to Impulse to do a full album. I got signed to Fresh Sound, New Talent, the Spanish label, to do a full album. And that's how we put it together.
How do you compose? Is it something that you're always working on? You're always writing? How does it work as far as consider the piano, or how does it go
Most of my
initially?
composing is done at the piano. As far as inspiration, I have muses that, sometimes I write with a certain person in mind. Sometimes I just start out with a really simple idea and do the sort of finish the sentence, which is play the idea and then what would I say next? There's a lot of different ways to compose. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night with an idea. Um, uh, it's I wrote one of my best tunes. I wrote after my now wife. She's gonna love that I'm telling the story. I tell it all the time. My wife VJ Barry and I met each other when we were both 24, and we got together and we fell in love really quick. And she got really scared and she broke up with me after a couple of months. And so my heart was extremely broken. So I wrote this tune called "Losing Victory." VJ means victory in the Indian language, and it's a beautiful tune. It's longing, sad, and pretty, And I wrote that because she broke my heart, but it worked out because we got back together.
Well, that's awesome. That's a great story.
Yeah.
Wow. So basically, how long were you in New York? What kind of caused you to leave after a while? I know you were early 2000s.
Yeah, I started in '92, and then I left New York in 2004. And in 2002, I turned 30, got married, and got my wife pregnant. So that was a big year.
That was the S.
Yeah. And I remember I turned 30 in Beirut, Lebanon, because I had a gig in Beirut, Lebanon. And that was also, we used that as our honeymoon. And it was a rough time. It was after 9/11. And I was feeling depressed and I wasn't feeling like I used to.
You saw New York at a lot of different times, and I'm
Yeah.
curious, what was the biggest difference between 2004 New York and the clubs and when you got there in '92? I'd imagine it was kind of a stark difference.
Yeah, well, I think one of the people who made a big difference in New York and changed it a lot was Rudy Giuliani. He first of all cleaned up Times Square, which we were all, I think, pretty happy about because Times Square was just porno theaters, and it was just kind of a gross situation. But he also was a really tough mayor in that he arrested a lot of people for marijuana offenses that didn't need to be arrested, but that sort of cleaning up, quote unquote, of the city was the beginning of the real estate prices going up, and I just think it's much more difficult for someone, especially in Manhattan and Brooklyn now, to be a bohemian artist and sort of just get by. You can't really. You have to work really hard to just pay the rent, But there's still places in Brooklyn, like the place I was in last night, Ornithology,
You do wonder, too, with everything that happened in the past couple of years and New York being affected, you wonder if, in a way, it could be the birth of something new for artists.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, it's always changing, and it's still a destination for artists. And the thing that I miss most about New York is that, I mean, for example, before I left, the two drummers that I worked with on any gig were Greg Hutchison and Ari Honig, you know, and then I could just call them for gigs, and they would show up. Greg Hutchison would show up to a $50 gig in his Range Rover, you know, but he just wanted to play.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Let's
shouts to Greg Hutchison.
Let's do another song.
Okay, yeah, great.
Charles Owens Trio here, live in the studios of LTV. Get ready for their gig tonight, part of Hampton's Jazz Fest.
All right, easy living. 1, 2, 1, 2.
Nice. Charles Owens Trio here in the studios of LTV. I was looking at, we chatted briefly about this earlier, saxophone.
Oh, yeah.
And I just assumed that you've had it forever, but it's only a couple, well, you've only had it a few years.
Yeah, I've only had it since 2018. I had I have another tenor sax that is from 1953 that I had since '96. And this one I bought from a repairman in town who had just had it as his spare horn, and I tried it and loved it. And it's from 1962, made by the Selmer Company from Paris, and it's the most well-known saxophone. It's the one that's used by all my idols, Coltrane and Sonny Rollins and Michael Brecker, Joe Henderson. They all had Mark Sixes, they all had Selmers. And they use other ones, but they mostly use these Selmers, and they're just a beautifully, really well made, incredibly high quality materials, really high copper content in the brass. Brass is copper, tin, and zinc, but it's mostly copper, especially the nicer brass. And they're handmade, hand engraved, and the person who invented the sax, Adolphe Sax, was Parisian also, and so they're made in the tradition of Adolphe Sax, who was the one who invented it, patented 1841. And they have, they're known for their quirkiness in their intonation, but it takes a little while to get used to. But then
I was going to say, how long does it take to finally know that this is the right one?
Well, I immediately knew it was the right one by the way it sounded and the way it felt. But as far as the intonation, some notes are sharper, some notes are flatter. And you have to get used to that and literally adjust as you play all the time, and that does take a bit. So I'd say after about a year, I was ready to do my record. So if you listen to my record 3 and 13, Charles Owens Trio 3 and 13, that was my first record on this particular setup. And it was cool. It's a great record. In fact, that's what Joel Chris, the guy who is my booking agent now, that's one of his favorite records. Nice. And he has talked to me about that record often.
What does the future look like for you as far as putting together different records? And of course here for Hamptons Jazz Fest. But what are you working on right now?
Well, I just released I'm going to release. I recorded a record in March, and the first single just got released Friday. It's my arrangement of the beautiful Spinners tune, "Could It Be I'm Falling in Love." So everybody stream that on Spotify and Apple Music, so I get my 0.00001 cent. Thank you very much. That does add up. But I'm signed to an amazing record label called La Reserve Records, who a bunch of great younger people are signed to. Chad L.B. is a great saxophone player. Benny Benack, an amazing singer and trumpet player. Katie George, who just won a Juno Award for her album on La Reserve. So I'm really in great company. And so what I hope to do is continue to release records with them and continue to get great gigs like the Hamptons Jazz Festival.
It's an interesting time, too, because you mentioned the streaming, and there's, of course, what Spotify is interesting as far as how artists work with them. But at the same time, there's a lot of now that kid that had no access to jazz records when he's 8 can literally stream you and find you in such a different way. Did I hear that there was a Kanye West song or something that you guys got a lot of attention for streaming? And that's interesting how that crosses over and brings a new audience in.
Well, I'm always looking for great tunes, and my first criteria for a great song is the melody. It has to be really strong because I can't really do the lyrics. So the melody has to be really strong. And Kanye West is as controversial and crazy as he can be. I think he's a musical genius, and I think he's an incredible rapper and writer. And so there's an album that's called 808s and Heartbreak. And on the first song on that record is an incredibly haunting, beautiful song called Say You Will. And I was immediately fell in love with it and how beautiful it was. And it was, Kanye sings in sort of a tenor range. And this song is absolutely gorgeous. And so we recorded a version with Devon Harris, DJ Harrison, and Andrew Randazzo on electric bass. We recorded our version of it, and it immediately got put on a Spotify playlist called State of Jazz. And it's up to 500,000 streams at this point. And it just really caught on with people. And the song itself is 9 minutes long. And so I didn't expect, and I take a really long saxophone solo, but the sax solo is good, not only because it sounds good and everything, but it's a real journey. It's a story. The solo itself, I really tell a story, and I try to let the song affect me emotionally during the solo. And so it ends up not just being a solo on the chord changes to the song, but really soloing on the song.
It's fun to watch you play as you really just kind of you wonder where you are sometimes in your mind. And talking briefly before, you mentioned kind of a rough childhood. I'd imagine music is, I'll say your savior, so to speak, but it really,
Oh, you could say that.
yeah, managed to really get you. And it's interesting to see how it has to have been something that really has helped you over the years. To kind
Yeah,
of disappear and get away from it all.
for sure. Well, it's also helped me to work through some of these emotions that I'm feeling. I was, like I said, my father is a sociopath and, an abusive person. And he really caused me a huge amount of pain in my childhood. And so, luckily, I was able to deal with a lot of those things through the saxophone and improvising and playing really heartfelt music in front of people. And, as we know, people deal with trauma in their lives in a lot of different ways, and a lot of unhealthy ways, too. And music gave me not only something to live for during that, but also gave me a way to deal with the trauma of what I went through. And it is a savior, and it continues to be a savior. And that's why I'm so dedicated to it. And that's why when I play like it's literally the last time that I'm going to play, because it could be, and I just, I owe my life to it.
That's a great story, and great to see that you had that.
Believe me,
don't have.
I
So.
thank the universe for it every day. I really do.
What do you, as far as new musicians go, and you said you teach a lot of different saxophone online and in person, I would hope now, of course, with everything going on. What is it like? What do you tell them to kind of get them started as far as the best piece of advice or the one kind of thing that for everyone that you say, hey, how if you were back in their shoes, what would you tell them to do to kind of figure out their journey?
Well, I would say, as far as being an instrumentalist needs to have an idol, someone that they can literally just copy. These guys have an idol on their instrument that especially when they're younger, they don't have any shame in trying to play exactly like them, because it gives you, when you transcribe a Coltrane solo, or if you play a Ray Brown bass line, if you play a Philly Joe Jones like snare drum solo, it gives you a taste of what it feels like to be great before you're actually great. And when you feel how great that feels, and you could be this great if you came, then it's something that will help you stay on your path.
It's a great piece of advice, and it's interesting from such an improvisational type of music that it's because most people say, hey, don't copy, do this, do that, but it's very interesting that that's kind of the best advice.
Well, I would say it's important to make your own statement, but just as in any
learn,
discipline, you have to learn from the masters of it. It doesn't matter if it's music or architecture, dance, broadcasting.
Out of curiosity, and I want to introduce you guys.
Please.
Because you guys haven't, how long have you played together? Because not long in one case.
Today is our first gig with Jonathan, and I've known about Jonathan for a while and wanted to play with him ever since I heard him on some recordings with musicians that I love. And so today, Jonathan, I finally was able to get him to come play, not because he was avoiding it or anything. He's just busy, and I'm busy, and we just, I've been wanting to wait for the right time, because he's a world-class musician, and I want to make sure that I offer him something that's worth his time. Same with Chris Monson here on the bass. Chris Monson and I are both from Charlottesville. We've known each other for about 10 years. I think we played Smalls together back in 2015, and that was one of our first big gigs. And he's just an absolute monster on the bass, so strong, so I can depend on him to play anything with me and be great at it. And so I've played with Chris and he always pairs great with any drummer that he plays with. All the drummers love him because his time is so good and all that. And so, yeah.
It's always fresh. You have new musicians and constantly it's always changing.
That's what's great about this music.
Yeah.
It's like a language we all speak.
Very good. Let's wrap up. Let's do one more song.
Okay,
before
great.
We get ready for tonight's show for Hampton's Jazz Fest.
Thanks, you guys. Heartbreak Setbacks. One.
Chris, Jonathan, of course, Charles.
Yes.
Thank you so much for doing this.
It's my pleasure. It's great to meet you.
Is it always is it a challenge? And last question, because I want to wrap up with this.
Oh, man. You're fine, dude.
I'm curious. How do you challenge yourself to grow as a musician throughout the years? Because clearly you are, and playing with different people, I'm sure helps that. But do you kind of set different goals for yourself, or
Yes.
how does it work?
I do that all the time. Well, first of all, I continue to practice every day. And it's really boring to say that, but it is actually
How many hours out of or how much?
I get about an hour and a half a day, 6 days a week is my schedule, and I must do it. Not just for my own sake, but there's a lot of competition out here. A lot of people want to play tenor sax, understandably, because it's so fun, you know.
I'd imagine you just have to stay in shape for it too. It's a muscle in a way.
Sure, and practicing does that. You have to really take care of your body, especially now that I've just turned 50, and my body does not recover from things as it used to. So yeah, I'm a vegan. I don't smoke or drink or do anything like that anymore, and it's important because the music, the quality of music is the most important thing for me. So I have to keep practicing, and I have to keep writing, and also learning different material and checking out new artists. That song that we just played was by a great bass player and composer and singer named Thundercat, and he's really popular on the scene right now, and he's someone that I really look up to, and I love his music, and so even though there's only about 3 chords, it's really hard to play that song, and so learning people's new music and keeping up with new musicians. And understanding what people are into these days, and trying not to fall behind and get sort of antiquated with the things that I play, and just not being ever satisfied with myself. Being happy, and I love the way that just sounded, but I know I could do better next time, and I will. And so that's the attitude and the ethos with which I have to move all the time.
Very good. Well, it's been a pleasure. Charles Owens.
It's been my pleasure.
Chris, Jonathan, thank you so much for being a part. Good luck tonight at the gig, Hamptons Jazz Fest. And thank you for being a part of Homegrown here at LTV.
My pleasure. Thanks for having us.
My pleasure. Thank you.